Sabrina 70s comic issue 75. Out of nowhere, Sabrina can't make a cereal box float over to her, because apparently, that's the consequence of her first-class teen witch's license expiring. Where did that come from? Why would witches have to constantly get it renewed? That sounds like a gigantic waste of everyone's time. There's a reason no one would imagine that to be the case. And Sabrina opens the door to what are apparently her least favorite witches. The jealous sisters, Dina and Rena. How would they be jealous of her? They want her presence in Della's dimension. Wouldn't they just say Della's office? Because it's the home dimension of all witches. Della won't renew her expired license without her passing the test for Teen Witch First Class again. This story really should have been a flashback story to the time she got her Teenage Witch license, with a text box at the start of the story saying that right away. Introducing us to the concept this suddenly makes it seem even more stupid and arbitrary. And it'd always be stupid if she has to keep taking the test. Sabrina won't be given time to study either. That's unrealistic. She has to take a space ride on their broom, instead of them simply warping her to Della's house right away. Did they fly into a space portal to get to the other dimension with a mere broom ride? Already I'm impatient for the story to be over. Sabrina's fascinated at such weird cloud formations. They're probably the case because of too much magic in the sky. Too bad we're not told that. It turns out Della's gone to a cobra milking seminar at a manor. And it's pointed out that cobra milking isn't easy. For once, it's realistic enough to not have Della be there because she's busy. But I'd never imagine her to be at a seminar about milking animals. That's a rancher's business. Sabrina naturally can't take the exam well because there's too many distractions, like the constant rush of a waterfall and the screeching of a bat. This story sucks. There's no way this would happen. Every single witch would fail this test, including Della herself. Of course she fails and gets demoted to Teen Witch 4th Class. Out of nowhere, some bad guys know Della's away, and she's the only one who has power over them, as opposed to all the other equally powerful witches. And this scares the two evil witches we saw earlier, as they're covered in webs. A fly monster says that these two will bring a neat price on the tri-dimensional flea market. I'm just stunned because it came out of nowhere. Sabrina, since she can't zap away monsters so magical that only Della can handle, says that this will take all the concentration of her 4th class witch license knowledge. Despite being just as distracted here, she successfully summons an ancient Viking god of the wind and sea with a weird name, Njorth. I guess this is supposed to be epic, but I'm just confused that she thought of this. She tells him to let his frosty winds blow and put the webbers on the go. Good thing for her that the god wasn't busy doing something else at the time, like going to the bathroom. Or him being suddenly summoned here would be awkward and annoy him. So how am I supposed to believe that only Della can handle these monsters, if any witch can summon this god? Then the evil witches, after fortunately thanking Sabrina, ask her to get them down. Because apparently they can't do any magic without their hats. Huh? How? Is that why they're jealous of Sabrina? That's not their magic then. It's just borrowing magic put in the hat by someone else. I think they'd only lose their natural magic as a major punishment. So why would they be allowed to work directly for Della then? And then what's the point of taking away their powers if they have magic from their hats anyways? They wouldn't be allowed to have hats either. And Sabrina doesn't need a hat to have magic. Sabrina says she's just exhausted from racing up Njorth. And she sits there in a lawn chair not helping them, hoping to convince them into letting her take the test again. It's so obvious it should have ended with her passing the test. In the next story, Harvey and Sabrina are looking for stuff that were washed up on the beach after a storm last night. Sabrina finds a detailed kid's toy submarine. I guess that'll be important. Maybe Sabrina will shrink herself and explore it. Harvey puts blankets on the sand for them to lie on, and they get hungry and forgot to pack a sandwich. Harvey wants to walk way back to the refreshment stand and get them some sandwiches. All of a sudden, a woman small enough to fit in a conch shell crawls out of it and tells Sabrina that's her submarine. She says Atlanteans like her can tell when someone's a witch. How though? It's creative that Atlanteans aren't mermaids. At least this is a twist. She says she was testing a new submarine when last night she had to surface for repairs. And a sudden storm caught her and she was thrown overboard, and ended up here. She sprained her arm to the point where she can't operate the sub's controls. How? She asks for Sabrina's help, and she agrees as I wonder if this woman's gonna turn out to be a villain to give the story any kind of conflict at all. Sabrina puts the submarine in the water and shrinks down to control it with some instructions. They get to Atlantis and go into a chamber, and they have to wait for a while before all the water would get pumped out. That's realistic. She steps inside her undersea aircraft for a little sightseeing. So, the Atlanteans are aliens, right? If the witches from another dimension can look like humans and be aliens, then I guess these guys make just as much sense. They have to be aliens, so why aren't I being told that? Later, Sabrina thanks her for the Whirlwind tour that we didn't get to see. Maybe because comic space was wasted on advertisements. Instead of any world building being done on this place, giving us a full story about the city. She asks how she can get home, apparently forgetting that she's a witch who can just teleport. Apparently she forgets too because she tells her to take one of their biodegradable trouble bubbles. Everyone already knows the story of Atlantis, so what's the point of using it in a story? She'll shoot her to the surface, the wind will blow her ashore. You're counting on something as unreliable as the wind? What if it decides to go in the wrong direction? Sabrina could save herself with magic, but then why even go through all this trouble? It's interesting, but you'd think people would just use submarines to exit the city too. It makes sense that she thinks of Sabrina's normal size as abnormal because she's not used to it. Sabrina's bubble ends up in a hammerhead shark's mouth. If she can say a spell to make it spit the bubble out, why didn't she just warp back to where she was? Oh, what if she was seen? Well, she could have been seen getting out of the water. Sabrina wanted to make a pun when the shark was spitting her out. She'd just be relieved that she survived. Harvey shows up and says he got her a sub. And she doesn't look at it and assumes he's talking about a little submarine again. And tells him to throw it back. Hopefully she got to eat it anyways. In the next story, Sabrina says she accidentally spilled her witch's brew. I guess she was making it as homework. I wish I knew why she made it. At least explain the premise of the whole plot. Salem's glad this happened because apparently all he has to do is dip his tail in the stuff and he'll be able to perform magic. So wait, that's always why he was able to cast spells? Apparently in every story where he cast a spell, he dipped his tail into a potion off screen before it happened. Since he looks like a normal cat, and Sabrina said he couldn't use magic earlier, it makes sense that there has to be an explanation for where he got his magic from and why he has it. But he said he was an animal witch. Apparently, after the magic pill story where she said Salem is lucky he doesn't have to get involved in magical stuff, she found out he could cast spells, which would explain why she knew to tell him to stop Hilda from casting spells during a basketball game. It's so confusing how inconsistent Salem is. Anyway, Salem turns a dog into a frog when it's being walked. I wish the dog was mean to him first to justify this a little better. Hilda tells Sabrina that she saw Salem dip his tail in her brew from indoors. So Sabrina bets he's up to no good, implying that by this point, she's learned how he abuses magic. You'd think she would just warp him to her at that point. Salem uses magic to float a turkey over to some cats, and Sabrina gives the turkey back, but doesn't proceed to cast a spell to make a second turkey appear. Why didn't Salem just make a bunch of food appear instead of trying to steal a turkey? So naturally, Salem wishes Sabrina would just mind her own business. It's a shame Sabrina can't drain him of his magic. He sees some dogs barking at a little cat, and uses magic to cover them in fleas. Sabrina does it, thankfully without the cat still in danger, and puts a knot in his tail that'll stop his mischief, making him powerless. Apparently that'll tie up his magic until the brew wears out. Then a bank robber shoots out of the door and gets grabbed by the legs. Bank robberies happen so often in the Sabrina comics, they make you think they happen all the time. It turns out they put a lot of holes in that milk truck. Sabrina assumes this is Salem's fault, as some cats lick up the milk, and presumably they'll all get stomach aches afterwards. I'll never get past Salem's design, but him being mischievous fits with his personality from the show, so he was still entertaining. In the next story, we see some stereotypical witches spy on a teen witch in person, hiding behind a brick wall, flunking someone on a meanness test for helping an old lady cross the street. There's a reason I never imagined the spy witches I always talked about to be spying in person, especially when they're dressed up in attention-grabbing clothes like this. Wouldn't they just be staring into crystal balls to spy from a distance? Then they could stay in one place and never get spotted or inconvenienced. They're just begging people to go up to them and distract them, and I'm not being told that they're invisible to everyone around them. Obviously, these are horrible characters, because it's impossible to understand why they hate people for doing good deeds and are okay with flunking them on a test for it. We see a teen witch feeding some hungry stray cats. I like being told that Sabrina isn't, in fact, the only one who's nice. And apparently, she's actually in the majority, unlike what the comic implied before. Because one of them has to tell the other to keep searching, because Stella wants them to find at least one teenage witch who can pass the meanness test. Is this gonna lead to another story where Sabrina abuses her magic and gets given a witch award for it? When you do the same twist too many times, it stops being a twist. Not that it makes the story bad. I guess these Della cronies have a photo of every teen witch round on the clipboard, so that's why they know their witch is on site. Sabrina floats some things around on the beach, saying out loud that she's a witch as two mortals look over at her. And she makes her jug pour her a drink, and summons a hot dog with mustard. Then she says that Hilda thinks she's lazy for using her powers on minor matters. But what's the point of being a witch if you don't benefit from it? I don't buy that Hilda wouldn't use magic for every little thing either. In fact, she does. I remember the story where she got her ready for school when she was still asleep, and she used magic for every little thing there. Maybe those two witnesses of her magic are too scared to go up to her and will never be believed. They're smart enough to know they couldn't question her without consequences. Out of nowhere, Sabrina can't zap away the nasty clouds blocking out the sun because she's exhausted her powers. And now it'll take days for her to recharge them. But didn't Hilda strap herself into a huge battery in her house and recharge her powers way faster than days? Why doesn't every witch do that, instead of giving away their battery for days to be recharged annually? How is the magic still their own if they need to get it from somewhere else, after exhausting the magic they were born with a long time ago? Witches are born with the ability to have it, as well as born with it. I guess someone can only use the huge battery power pack in their house once, and then it's useless? Maybe it's really expensive? It really is a twist that Sabrina spends the rest of the story without her powers, so it's not that she abuses them. She just can't do good deeds with them right now. Because of that, she passes the meanness test and gets a Flying Broom Award. Somehow, in over 300 years, Hilda never earned one of those. 300 years ago, she was a teenager. They keep changing their mind about how old she is. Why is she bragging about getting it? She wouldn't have mistakenly gotten the award if the spy witches had been spying on her through a crystal ball, where they'd be able to hear what she said. Because then they'd hear her say out loud that she wants to do good deeds, but has exhausted her powers. This is the most inefficient way to spy on people for Della, and they would know better. And I'd want that coveted story about spy witches to involve them erasing mortals' memories of magic. Still, I like seeing good teenage witches. So this story should have happened a lot earlier in the comic. The first story sucks, because I'm expected to believe a teenage witch has to constantly get their witch license renewed when it expires without warning, and instantly take a test, where the room is full of distractions. Every witch would fail the test and things would have changed. Sabrina only got her powers back, off screen at that, because she got lucky. Because she got rewarded for summoning a god of all things to save people from monsters that only Della can handle. Even though any witch can just summon a god whenever she wants. At that point, who's the god? He's almost no different than a genie here. Why didn't the other witches save themselves like that? The second story is about Sabrina finding the tiny submarine of an Atlantean, which in a twist are just tiny humans who know about witches instead of mermaids, despite living in an underwater city. It's still an underwater city called Atlantis, so it's still not creative. The city has an air dome in it that realistically requires a chamber to be emptied of water to enter it after you get there by submarine. The woman had sprained her arm from the ocean throwing her around, so she needed Sabrina's help to operate the sub-controls to get home. Does it even make sense that she got hurt? I guess the reason Atlanteans know about witches despite not having powers to save themselves is that they were all shrunken by witches in the first place and vanished to that city. But that would be too dark. Why didn't this society get any world building? I like them more than the jerks of Meropis. Instead of a plot happening in the city itself, Sabrina's tour of it is off screen, Cause I guess the writer thought it would be too boring to just rip off Atlantis completely even more. And she forgets she's a witch and doesn't just teleport back to the beach. So she gets sent out of the city in a bubble, where a hammerhead shark tries to eat her until she casts a spell to make it spit her out. If she at least got to eat that sub Harvey got, there'd be a happier ending instead of her just being upset after a near-death experience. The third story forgets that Salem's an animal witch, and instead explains that Salem only has magic when he gets it from either the occasional magic pill or a magic brew he dipped his tail in. And it's temporary again. That's confusing the whole time. And because Hilda saw him do it, she warns Sabrina and she follows him, undoing all of his troublemaking spells. It was out of character for her to not summon up a second turkey to feed those strays. That teen witch Regina is a nicer witch than her. Eventually, she reveals she can put a knot in his tail to deactivate his powers all of a sudden, and she assumes the milk truck got spilled because of him anyways. The final story is about Dell spies following teen witches and seeing who will win a meanness award. So I'm spending the whole time wondering why there'd ever be a meanness test, and why they'd ever spy in person instead of by looking in a crystal ball. How were they never caught? But at least I got to see that Sabrina using her powers for good isn't totally non-existent for teenage witches, because she was the only one who won the meanness test. It was nice to see that. She only won because she exhausted her powers.